Over here. We left off on Hey Amud Aleph. It's about 5 lines from the top. 5 lines from the top. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar. See that? Okay. Thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. It's of our learning. We should have the base of Mikdash immediately. Okay, so let's see. We had over here a statement from Rav. Statement was that Minchas Ha'omer shekamtza shlei lishma psula. That if the Omer was, the Kmitza was done, shlei lishma, the Kayan that was doing the Kmitza had intention for a different sacrifice. So we said that it was going to be puzzle. So it was going to be puzzle because since it's ineffective, so you have to bring another carbon. Comes along Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says we're going to have another opinion after Rish Lakish. But meanwhile, Rish Lakish Amar Minchas Ha'omer shekamtza shlei lishma is ksheira. Exactly the opposite of Rav. He says that if the Kayan that's doing the Kmitza has intention, he's doing the scoop with his 3 fingers, he has intention for a different sacrifice, a different mincha, that could happen. So it's going to be kosher. However, v'shirah ein nechalim ad shetavi minchas ha'omer acheres v'tatirena. You have a slight problem. The mincha is actually kosher. But the only thing is, you can't eat it because the mincha, the omer that you brought, is supposed to be permitting the chadash, the new grain. And part of the new grain that it's permitting is this mincha, that is this omer that you're bringing right now. The omer now allows all new grain to be eaten on the 16th of Nisan. From then on, all the new grain that grew that winter could be eaten. And included in that new grain is also this mincha itself, which could be eaten. The problem is that this mincha was brought shalei lishma, so yeah, the mincha is kosher, and you could eat it. But the problem is it's missing the omer, because it wasn't brought as a carbon omer. It was brought as a mincha, as some other mincha, whatever. So the mincha is kosher, but you can't eat it until you bring another mincha, another omer, to allow the food to be eaten, allow the mincha to be eaten. And we need to bring another mincha to allow the grain, another omer to allow the grain. We didn't say that it's effective. We just said that it's kosher. Rav said that it's ineffective, and therefore it's not kosher. Rish Lakish says, no, it's ineffective, but it's kosher.
Kosher.
So what does it mean kosher? Whenever we say kosher in Zvachim or Menachos, we meant that you put the part on the altar and the remnant gets eaten. That's what meant kosher. Then we would add in, but do the owners satisfy their obligation? We would usually say no. So then what would mean kosher? Kosher meant just that it was, you could partake of it. So here, you could partake of it, you just have one slight problem, that it's chadash, it's the new grain, so you can't eat from it yet. So that we could resolve by bringing another omer, and that resolves it. Correct the Gemara. Gemara's a question. Mikrav hechi karva. How are you allowed to offer it? Imashki Yisrael, minamutal Yisrael. We have a pasuk that tells us the only things you're allowed to bring on the altar are things that are kosher for a Jewish person to eat. Since this is not eligible for a Jewish person to eat, because it's before the omer, so you shouldn't be allowed to offer it. You try to offer it as an omer, but it wasn't effective as an omer because you had the wrong intention. So you have to bring another omer. But meanwhile, it's not kosher. It's Isser Chadash. So how are you allowed to offer it? Now the omer itself, that it's like simultaneous. You offer it as it's becoming kosher. But this doesn't become kosher when you're offering.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm a little lost already. I understand the argument about, can you offer something to God that is not something you would eat yourself?
Right.
but before it's kosher. I just don't understand that.
So on the 16th of Nisan, the new grain is becomes permitted by the bringing of the Eimer.
Good. Okay. I
This
didn't
is
get.
brought
Okay, thank
from
you.
the new grain. This is brought from the new grain, but it was brought as an Eimer from the new grain, but it wasn't effective as an Eimer, so it's still prohibited to eat. So we're asking,
Okay.
you can't eat it.
But
Right.
Yeah.
why is it
Thank you.
simultaneous?
No,
It becomes
the Eimer itself, before you offer the Eimer, you can't eat the Eimer.
right. So how can you bring it?
So how do you bring it? So because as you're bringing it, it's becoming kosher.
As
But
you bring it, it's coming kosher. Okay.
yeah, at the moment that the Eimer is brought, you're allowed to eat it, the
Hmm.
Eimer itself. But this
Got it.
Eimer was ineffective. So it remains prohibited to eat even after it's brought until you bring another Eimer. Right? Does that make sense?
Mhm. So you knew that Kmitza was wrong, and then you bring it anyway.
The question is, you did the Kmitza wrong. The question is, how are you allowed to now offer it up if you're not going to be able to eat it?
Mhm.
Two steps, right? If he offered it, like had the wrong person in mind, just like, different people are bringing him in, and if he has the wrong person in mind, wouldn't the second person like also like redeem it?
No, we're not thinking over here that it's being brought for a different person because the Aimer is a community sacrifice, which individuals don't bring. The problem over here was that it was brought Shalei Lishma, means for a different mincha. I thought it was a mincha of a donation offering or something. Yeah. So how could it be offered? Amar Ravada Baraba says, Kasavar Reish Lakish ein mechusar zman l'bay bayayim. Something on that day itself is not considered mechusar zman. It's considered edible, halachically edible. The Eimer wasn't brought. It says, yeah, okay, so you just wait a little bit. It sounds like maybe, let's say someone was milchik and he brings a carbon. No, that would be a bad example because you can't eat because he's milchik. He has to wait 6 hours because if it's the hard cheese that he ate. No, because that would be permissible to other people. But here we're saying that when does it become permissible? On that day, so it's still considered edible. Because later today it's going to be edible. So it's not considered that it's prohibited. Okay, that's a teretz. Yeah. Since later today it's going to be edible, so it's not considered prohibited. Right?
Or if
Arla doesn't become permitted.
no,
The tree becomes permitted. Fruits don't become. Okay. Masev Ravad Bar Masev Ravad Breder of Yitzchak. Rabbi the son of Rabbi Yitzchak, has a question. Yesh ba'ifes shein b'menachos. He's quoting a Mishnah or Brisa. Says that there's a distinction between birds and meal offerings and menachos. Yesh b'menachos shein ba'ifes. There's certain things, certain qualities that the birds have that the menachos don't have. Certain things that the menachos have that the birds don't have. Yesh ba'ifes. What are the qualities that the birds have? The bird offerings that the flower offerings don't have. Birds could be brought by a partnership. Two people can pledge to bring birds as a carbon. The people they're doing business together, make a big successful business. They say, let's bring a gift. Let's bring some birds to Hashem, and they bring it as a partnership. So that's allowed. In the parentheses, it says, "Ava menachos nefesh ksiva," but by menachos you can't do that. Now, I'm not sure if we're supposed to read that. The menachos nefesh ksiva. Haggai Tzin Kadashim does have it. So, okay. By menachos, you can't be brought as a partnership. Mechusri kapara. Someone that's missing a his sacrifice that will allow him back in. All of those people, for example, which is a zav, yoledus, and mitzayra. It's interesting. The parentheses here are like a commentary. These people that were impure, or the woman that gave birth, or the mitzayra, they have to bring birds as part of their atonement, as part of their to come back in. So, but they don't have to bring a mincha. So the birds have these special qualities. First of all, they can be brought as partnership. Second of all, they're brought together with this allowing the person to come back into the to be active in the temple. And there's also another quality of the birds is that even though there's the act of slaughtering the bird is with the fingernail, which would be invalid anywhere else except for here. So it's a special exemption that we have that only in the temple do we allow such a thing to be slaughtered like this. Mashenkim b'menachos, the carbon mincha has nothing like this. None of these qualities. I think we said 4 things. Partnership, plus kapara, 3 things, and hutrim michlalan. But there's said 3 things. The ish b'menachos. Now let's do the other way. Menachos has certain things that the birds don't have. Menachos tunis keli. That a carbon mincha, you have to put it into a vessel. You have to take the kaimitz and put it into a vessel. We learned that when you're offering the bird, you actually don't have any vessel to catch the blood. You just take the bird, the neck of the bird, and you push it against the wall. So you don't have, there's no vessel there. Next thing is tenufa. The carbon mincha has to be waved. You have to wave it up and down and back and forth, and right? The lahavdil, the Quakers and Shakers, right? They were waving this way, that way, or something. Lahavdil. Okay, and hagasha, you have to bring it close to the mizbeach. The yeshim b'tzibur k'biyachid. Another thing is that the carbon mincha could be brought as a communal offering, but the birds are never brought as communal. The community never brings birds. They bring menachos, but they're not birds. Mashenkim ba'ifas. The birds don't have any of these qualities. How many did we say here? Keli, Tenufa, Hagasha, Tzibur K'biyachid, 4 things. Now the question is, V'misa, and if it's true what Rish Lakish is saying, or maybe maybe a teretz that we gave for this. If it's true what Rish Lakish is saying, we have a case where it would be prohibited to the congregation. However, it's still permissible to offer it on the mizbeach. This is a case where the omer was brought for the wrong intention, and we say that even though it's not eligible for people to eat, but nevertheless we still say that it's a kosher mincha. It's a kosher mincha on the altar. So just like we said that birds have some unique quality that you can slaughter a bird by using the fingernail, which that would be prohibited for anyone else outside the temple. So here we have the same thing where you have something that's by the carbon mincha, where it's prohibited for anyone outside the temple, and nevertheless you could put it in the temple. You could bring it. Yeah. You follow? You get what's happening? We have a list of things that apply to birds but don't apply to mincha. And in that list was that a bird has something that's only permitted in the temple but not permitted outside the temple. According to Reish Lakish, we're adding in, it's not true. We have the same law by a carbon mincha, where a mincha is permitted in the temple because it's on the 16th of Nisan, where later that day it's going to become permitted. It was brought for the wrong intention, but we say that according to Reish Lakish, it's still kosher. And nevertheless, outside the temple, that wouldn't be permitted. So we answer, Kivan dein mechusas man l'baybayim lavi surahu. Said 1 second, it's not even prohibited. It's not prohibited. Today it's going to be permitted. You don't call that prohibited. Later on today, it's going to be permitted. That doesn't go under the category. But you were telling me about the bird where you can shecht it with the fingernail. That's a different story. That's totally prohibited. Over here, it's just temporarily. You have to wait a little bit, like milchiks, fleishiks. You have to wait for the Eimer.
And it's also not a normal case, right? It's just a.
It's also not the normal case, but we're using a not normal case to get. You're right. Granted.
So is this Masechta going to cover birds as well as flower offerings?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Did we have we had Chata Sa'if in Zvachim. Did we have a parak of Eila Sa'if also? Had a parak called Chata Sa'if. I think the birds were mainly covered.
Okay.
Yeah, in Zvachim. You're going to have a lot of good stuff in Menachos. Did you do Menachos before with us? So Menachos is going to have the laws of mezuzah, tefillin, and tzitzis, which is interesting that it's put in here. And then it has a lot of interesting things. It's not a dry Masechta. It's packed with good stuff.
But by the way, at some point when you switch times, I'm going to have to say goodbye because I can't make times work for me. Well, just don't take it personally when it happens.
You're saying the what's it called? The 7:30?
Yeah, I can't make it work.
Okay. I'll push it off till the end.
No, you do it when it's convenient for you and everybody.
Okay. Hill was saying the Beis Hamikdash will be here by then. I didn't say a bracha yet, right? Okay. But now we say Masav Rav Sheshes. Sheshes has a question. It says Hiktim Matan Shemen Lamatan Dam. Here we're talking about the Mitzayra that needs to apply on his thumbs and big toes blood and oil as part of his purification. The blood goes first and the oil goes second. Let's say they didn't do it in order. They put on the way the ladies cook. They put this in, what do you mean the recipe? The eggs, the flour, the sugar, you don't follow exactly the things. They add it all in. So here, they put on him the oil and then they do the blood later. The problem says b'makayim. What's Rashi over here? It says al makayim dam hasham yitin hashemen. You have to put it on the place of the blood. You can't do it out of order. So what you do is you malen shemen. You have to fill up that jug with oil again. V'yachsav yitin shemen achar matan dam. You have to reapply it. You have to go back, put the blood on, then put the oil on. Matan b'hainis matan sheva. Let's say it's supposed to be sprinkled. The oil is supposed to be sprinkled 7 times, and then it's supposed to be applied to the thumbs. Let's say they put on the thumbs before they sprinkled it. So it says Yimaleh Hashem, and you have to actually redo this. To fill it back up with oil and restart. It's a do-over. And then you do the sprinkling of the oil, and then you do the application of the oil on the thumbs. If we're going to accept Rish Lakish's teretz, then what's going on over here? Why do we say that the Eimer is acceptable? Why do we say that this mincha is acceptable, even though the Eimer wasn't brought? Because later on today it's going to be fine. And there's no such thing as mechusar zman, that you're out of the time when it comes to the same day. The same day, you just wait a little bit, right? Milchiks, fleishiks, you just wait, big deal. So we could say the same thing. What's the difference if it's out of order? It should be that, well, later on you'll go do it. What's the problem? If you say that there's that the bringing the Eimer later is going to rectify this carbon mincha, so we should say the same thing by the applications of the oil. You'll do it later, and it's going to be fine. It's considered like on time. Amar Rav Papa Shani Hilchos Mitzayir D'Ksiva Bo Havaya. Papa says, what type of question is this? It says clearly how the order that you have to do it. It says Havaya Damar Hakasav Zeis Tiya Teres Mitzayir. This is the law. It says Tiya. it shall be. It shall be the laws of the Mitzvah. Tia b'aviyasatei. The word tia, it shall be, teaches me that it has to be done in this order and not out of order. So we have a clear pasuk. You tried to compare it to an omer that was brought that wasn't eligible, and then da. There's no comparison. Over here we have a pasuk that tells me it needs to be brought in order. Master Rav Papa has a question. Also by the Mitzayra, he has to bring some sacrifices. And he's supposed to bring the Asham first and then the Chatas. Let's say he brings the Chatas first before the Asham. That Chatas that was brought first, we don't say, meanwhile, just stir the blood so it doesn't congeal, and then we'll bring the Asham quickly, and then we'll sprinkle the blood of the Chatas, we'll get it all in. You don't say you can do that. Rather, you have to take this Chatas out and burn it, and then what you do is, tu b'tzurasi means, I think you let it spoil, and then you take it out and burn it. What's the problem? You later on that day you're going to bring the asham. We said already. Ein mechusas man l'baybayim. Okay? Teitzel basis. We have a solution. Gemara says, "Amai kamoisiv Rav Papa." Why is Rav Papa asking this question? For Rav Papa who da'amar shani elchus mitzvah d'ksiv be'havaya. Rav Papa already told us the teretz to this question that it says zois tia teres hamitzayra, that any laws of the mitzvah have to be done in order, and if not, it's invalid. Rav Papa knows the answer before he even asked the question. Ella Rav Papa chikakashli. Rav Papa had a different question. Oh, this is the nazir, not the mitzvah. Show me your Gemara.
They go and then
No, there's pickle and then there's nicer. Yeah, so you leave it overnight. Okay, yeah. But this is the mitzvah. Okay. No, because it's invalid. That's what you have to do. We don't want to burn it when it's still intact. Everything's good, because that's look like shaming it. You allow it to become puzzle by nicer, and then you can burn it. Okay. Sorry?
Disgraceful.
Disgraceful. Okay. So why is Rav Papa asking this question? So we answer, Rav Papa chikashale. Rav Papa had the following question. Maybe we could say that what needs to be done in order, that's only the avodah. But shchita la b'avodah, but the slaughtering of the sacrifice of the chatas was not really an avodah. You should be allowed to sneak it in, because it's the avodah of the mitzvah needs to be tia, needs to be in order. But this was just the shchita, so it shouldn't be a problem. Elam Rav Papa, rather Rav Papa says, Hainu time of the Rish Lakish the Kasavar Hey Mizrach Mata. We give a brand new teretz. The teretz that we were giving before was Ein Mechusas Man by Bayim. That if later on today it's going to become permissible, you don't have to worry about it, and you just say that it's whatever. It's going to be permissible later. It's not considered out of order. But we had a question on this. It says, so why do we say this by the shchita of the chatas, by the mitzvah? We should say the same thing, that you'll do it later. So, rather, if Papa says the reason for Rish Lakish is different, the reason for Rish Lakish is, he says that you don't actually need the Omer to be brought to allow it to be permissible. You're supposed to wait for the Omer, but actually, once it gets light on the 16th, it's already permissible. Big Chiddush. The Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish, Damri Tavayo, Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish, they both say, even when the Beis Hamikdash was there, even while the Beis Hamikdash was standing, Heyer Mizrach Mater, that the sun coming up, maybe it's even before the sun coming up, maybe it's dawn, Heyer Mizrach. Even by the dawn, it's already permissible on the 16th to start eating. You get your Chadash bagels already 16th in the morning before the Omer is brought. Pesach, so it's going to be matzah bagels. Not so exciting.
Yeah, because otherwise, how would we be permitted today?
So it's actually a discussion if it's the 16th or the night. There's a Gemara Sukkah about this, where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that you have to wait till evening. I think it's that you have to wait till evening. Someone may say that last year, before Mashiach came, we already ate the bagels in the morning, the new grain. This year that we have the Beis Hamikdash, we'll do the same thing. We'll eat it in the morning. And the truth is, you really have to wait for the Omer. So he said you have to wait for after the Omer. It should be until after the Omer, which I forget if it's Chatzais or when it was assumed or it was evening. It's a Mishnah in Sukkah. So, whatever the case is, this opinion holds that even when the Beis Hamikdash is around, it's already permissible in the morning. So what does the Omer do? Well, it's a mitzvah to wait for the Omer, but okay, now it says Rish Lakish didn't actually say this, but we learned it from something that happened, or something that was in passing. We figured out that this is Rish Lakish's opinion. The Tanan, as it was taught in a Mishnah, and Rish Lakish is going to comment on the Mishnah. We'll figure out where we got this from. It says like this: Ein mevian minchas bikurim and minchas behema kaidem la'imer. You can't bring these other types of other menachos. Minchas bikurim would mean the bikurim. It's really supposed to say menachos ubikurim. Minchas behema means the meal offering that's brought together with an animal, like the wine and the oil, that type of offering. You can't bring that on the 16th before the Omer is brought. You have to wait for the Omer to be brought. Kaidim Leimer. We're going to learn actually that the word 16th doesn't go over here. We'll see. If you can't bring it before the Omer. The parenthesis says because it needs something that's permissible to a Jew, and it's not permissible to a Jew to eat, so you can't bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. If you do bring it, it's invalid. Can't bring before the 2 loaves of bread, which is on Shavuos. You can't bring it either. Kosher, but if you bring it before the 2 loaves of bread, it's going to be kosher. Where's Perek Rabbi Shmuel? Is that later on over here? Yeah, it's in the 6th Perek. In the 6th parak, it's going to be explained, all of this. Where is it? Samaches. Samaches Medala. Okay. So, Gemara says, Amar Bitzchak Amar Rish Lakish. Bitzchak says the name of Rish Lakish, Leishanu ala ba'arba asar b'chamisha asar, b'shisha asar, imhevi kasher. It says, when did we say that you're not allowed to bring these types of menachos before the Omer? That's if you're trying to bring it on the 14th or the 15th. But on the 16th, it's not a problem. Because Alma Kasavar, what's the reason why the 16th is not a problem? Because Heyer Mizrach Mater, because once it becomes light, it's already permissible for Jewish people to eat the grain, and therefore it's allowed to be brought also. Rava Amar. Okay, that's all of this is Rish Lakish. The Rish Lakish argued on Rav that says a mincha that's shalei lishma is kosher. Rav said that it's going to be pasul. Rish Lakish says kosher. Rava Amar mincha zayim comes to shalei lishma ksheru v'shirei nechalin. He's even more lenient than Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish said the mincha, the Omer that was brought shalei lishma is pasul, but you can't eat it. You have to wait for another Omer to be brought to eat it. If it's permissible in the morning, why can't you eat it? According to Rish Lakish. So we say that lechatchila you're supposed to wait for the Omer, but b'diavad it's permissible already in the morning. So Rava says no, you could even eat it right now. And you don't need another Omer to be brought to be mata. This shein machshava meyalas mishrayla avoda b'davarayla avoda makamrayla avoda. We don't even consider his thoughts as anything. It's nothing. He had the wrong intention. Big deal. It's nothing. Why? Because the thoughts are only effective if it has these 3 qualities. The Gemara elaborates. only someone that was fit to do the service. You can't have just a person come in and have thoughts and say, "Oh, you invalidated the." Someone was saying that there's an opinion that holds that if a person has the wrong thoughts in his tefillin, he could invalidate the tefillin. So he's saying, how could the Lubavitchers, they're putting tefillin on people on the on Miftzayim? How do you know if they're having the right thoughts? They're invalidating the tefillin. Now, I don't think there's such an opinion. There may be an opinion, but it's definitely not the halacha. But I think they asked the Rebbe that tefillin needs kavanah. How could you put tefillin on people that are on the street? They're not having the kavanah like a frum person is having the right kavanah. The Rebbe says exactly the opposite. Frum person that does it every day, you don't know what type of kavanah he has. The guy that's doing it once in his life on the street is for sure having the right kavanah. Yeah. So, which type of thoughts are going to be effective? Only someone that's able to do the service. Lafuke kayin balmum. That's to exclude a kayin that is a balmum that has a defect that isn't allowed to do the service anyway. So his thoughts don't affect the service. Davar roy lavaida. Only something that is fit for service. Lafuke minchas aimed lechazia dechidashu. Okay, what we mean over here is that something that's typical to be brought as a sacrifice. Over here, we're using barley as a sacrifice by the Omer, which is not a typical sacrifice. So we're saying that thoughts by a barley sacrifice are not considered, will not invalidate the sacrifice. There's a Saita that also brings a barley sacrifice. They said that's not also a real sacrifice. That's just figuring out if she's guilty or not. That's not a real sacrifice. And this is also not a real sacrifice. This is just coming to allow the new grain to be brought. We're talking about a real sacrifice. There's a sacrifice that's brought for regular things. So thoughts by the Omer aren't going to invalidate it. And also only thoughts that are in a place where you're able to do the service, lafuke, it's coming to exclude nifkam ha-mizbeach. Let's say the mizbeach had a defect in it, and the kayin, after when the mizbeach had that defect in it, the kayin had thoughts of pigel. So we say that those thoughts don't invalidate the sacrifice. If they right away fix the mizbeach, you replaster it and put on he's allowed to bring that sacrifice because it wasn't at a time when it was effective. Excuse me.
Very specific. If there's anything else wrong, it's not pigment. Like for it to be pigment, everything had to be perfect, and only pigment was.
Yeah. Here we're saying that everything is perfect because when you're offering it, everything is perfect. There's no other invalidation here. It's just the moment that he had the pigel thoughts. At that moment, the mizbeach had a defect. And so therefore, when you fix the mizbeach right now everything's perfect. The carbon mincha is acceptable as well.
It's hard to mess up.
Right.
You only have it by law.
Right. Exactly. That's the pshat. What Rav is saying is that it's hard to mess up the Omer. Yeah. Okay. The following Gemara, Reb Naftali, is going to take a little bit of patience. It's going to go back and forth a little bit more than most people's nerves can handle. So, but nevertheless, we'll work it out. Sometimes you're talking to someone and you feel the conversation has ended, but the other person doesn't know that, and they keep on going. This Gemara, it just keeps on going. You'll see. Tana Rabbanan. Start in the Brisa. Kishwaimer min abakar lamata shein Talmud laimar Allahitziat treifa. Okay, we have a source in the Torah that says that you can't bring an animal that's a treifa for a carbon. Pasuk says in Ma'ila karbanai min abakar. It says min behema is coming to teach me that you can't use an animal that a human lived with it, in whichever. Then Min Bakar tells me you can't bring an animal that was worshipped as an idol, right? And Minatzain tells me that you can't bring an animal that's designated for a sacrifice to an idol. Then it says again Min Bakar. So our Gemara tells me, Shwaimer Min Bakar Lamata. When it says again Min Bakar Lamata means lower down on the page, right? It says again Min Bakar from the cattle. Shein Talmud Leimer. It didn't need to say that. It's coming to exclude that you can't bring an animal that's a treifa as a sacrifice. But what's a treifa? Treifa is that it wouldn't have survived because of some illness. It wouldn't have survived for 12 months. Now, the Gemara asks, you bringing me a pasuk that tells me that I can't, you bring this as a karban? Alay dinu. I don't need a pasuk for that. I can know this logically. It says from a kal v'chaymer. Ma balmum shemateres l'adisur legavaya. If there's a little cut on the eyelid or a little cut on the lip or something, you can't bring it as a sacrifice, but you can shecht it in the shlachtais, and they serve it with a stamp as labavit shchita. It's perfectly kosher. So, and there's no, but for a sacrifice you can't bring it. Treifa shasur lehedyitin. It didn't shasur legavaya. If the animal would be treif, it would be treif in the shlachtais. It would be mamish treif. So you're going to tell me you need a pasuk to tell me that you can't bring it as a sacrifice? Of course you can. The laws of sacrifice are so much stricter than the laws of kashrus. So why do you even need a pasuk to tell me that you can't bring a treifa? You can't even bring a balmum. So we have a kal v'chaymer from a balmum that tells me that I should not require a pasuk to teach me that you can't bring a treifa. What's put to that? No, that would only be if there were two witnesses. This is if there was even without two witnesses. They're not. They only put to death with two witnesses. Those animals.
It's the same thing with Meiser, I think. A balmum is counted as one of the 10.
Oh.
The treifa is not.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, that's going to come up over here somewhere. Okay. But what this leaves us is with a question. Why do I need a pasuk if I know it from logic? The Gemara rejects the logic by saying, "Chela v'dam yechichu." 1 second. What about the forbidden fats and blood that get put on the altar? Shasurim lehadit u'mitarim legavaya. You're not allowed to eat blood. You're not allowed to eat the forbidden fats, but the altar does get it. Maybe I could say that you're not allowed to eat a treifa, but the altar is allowed to eat a treifa. Comes along a pasuk and tells me you're not. Everything that we're going to do in this Gemara is coming to tell me why logically the altar should be able to get a treifa. Hence, I need the pasuk to tell me that it doesn't, that it can't. Okay, so the Gemara says, but chela v'dam is a different story. Ma'ala chela v'dam shkein ba'am mechlal heter tem b'tsheifa shkula asura. It says 1 second. Back to our original question. Why do I need a pasuk for a treifa to tell me that the mizbeach can't get a treifa? The mizbeach can't get a balmum. If you're going to tell me that there are certain things that are prohibited to a person, but nevertheless the mizbeach can get it. For example, chela v'dam, which is prohibited to a person, but the mizbeach can have the chela v'dam. 1 second. Chela v'dam is part of a kosher animal, and so the mizbeach can get it. But the treifa is entirely treif. You don't have any source for something that's entirely treif to go on the mizbeach. Therefore, I should learn from a balmum that if a balmum you're allowed to eat but can't go on the altar, a treifa where you're not allowed to eat for sure can't go on the altar. And don't prove from chila v'dam. Those are specific cases where the animal's kosher, and those are just parts of the kosher animal that go on the altar. Where it says malika techiach shekula yisr basur lehedit mitaris legavaya. 1 second. When I take a bird and I kill it with the fingernail, you're not allowed to eat it, but the altar is allowed to eat it. And the malika of the bird is entirely asur for you. It's not just the chela v'dam. And nevertheless, the altar can get it. So maybe the treifa should also be allowed. And hence, I need the pasuk to tell me that it's not allowed. Would be a good teretz. Gemara says, Mala Malika, Shen Kedushasa Isarta. Shas Kedushas Lemizbeach Nesra Lehedya. This is taken out. Basically, Mashen Kibetreif, Shen Kedushasa Isarta. This is when does the animal become treif? When it's inside the sanctuary, when it's inside the courtyard and you do the malika on it, that's when it becomes the bird. When does the bird become invalid for you? That's only as you're doing the service, it's becoming invalid. But by the treifa, it was already invalid. It was already not kosher for you from beforehand. So you can't compare the fact that malika can go on the altar. Therefore, a treifas should also be allowed to go on the altar without the pasuk. And now the pasuk tells me that it can't. You can't compare it. There's no comparison.
Had a choice because
It would have been okay for you, but not for the mizbeach. Can't use a knife for a bird on the mizbeach, right? The im hishavta. I'm not sure if I'm reading that word right. And if you're going to give me a teretz, so so if you're going to answer this up and say why I need to have, why I can't, you learn from the Kal V'Chaimer, so then I'll tell you that it's okay. So I have the pasuk that tells me that you can't bring a treifa on the mizbeach. The Gemara asks, my im hishavta. What are you saying that if you're going to give me a teretz? What teretz were you thinking of giving me? And now I need the pasuk. So Amar Rav says, Mishum dikla meimar, mincha so'imer techiach shasur lehedyat u'miteres legavaya. So say like this. We have a case where there is something that's prohibited to a person to eat, but nevertheless the mizbeach is allowed to eat it. The aimer. The aimer is the new grain, and you're not allowed to eat it, but the mizbeach is allowed to eat it.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I don't understand why anybody would think you need a pasuk. That you can put something on the mizbeach that we couldn't consume ourselves. I mean, take Zavakim. The whole point of Zavakim is all the steps are to acquire blood and get that blood up to the mizbeach. We couldn't take that cup of blood and drink it.
Yeah.
But we have the Torah tells us to do that. So why do you need a pasuk now? Or why does somebody think you need a pasuk?
So it's working actually the other way. It's working that an animal that's a treifa, we're not allowed to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a pasuk that tells me that you can't bring it as a carbon. So what the Gemara is doing is the Gemara is saying that if you're not allowed to eat it, so for sure you can't bring it as a carbon. Because a balmum, which you are allowed to eat, can't go as a carbon. So anything else that you're not allowed to eat for sure can't go as a carbon. So what we're looking for now are a bunch of items that you are not allowed to eat and nevertheless are fit to be a carbon. One of them was blood. You're not allowed to eat the blood, but nevertheless it's fit to be a carbon. Chalev.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to chalev, but it's fit to be a carbon. If that's the case, then maybe the treifa, which you're not allowed to eat, is fit to be a carbon.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And then
okay.
now we're holding where we said you're not allowed to eat the new grain, but nevertheless the mizbeach is allowed to. So it's fit to be a carbon. So maybe the treifa should also be get in there. So the Gemara says, Mala minchas aimer shkein materes chadash. The minchas aimer is doing exactly that. It's permitting you can't compare the treifa to the aimer. The aimer is allowing the new grain to be brought. They say, well, b'shvius. We're talking about on the Shemitah year where there is no new grain. The only thing the Aimer is doing is just the regular sacrifice. There's no new grain because it's the 7th year. You weren't allowed to plant, to harvest. Well, you could harvest, but you can't plant. You can't do a regular harvest, but you can take inside the house what you need for the moment, right? So it's a Shemitah year. So it's a regular, and nevertheless, you're not allowed to eat it, and the Mizbeach is allowed to eat it. So it says, Shvius namish kein mater svichen b'shvius. What about those grains that grew wild? You weren't allowed to eat it until the Shemitah, even on the Shemitah, those grains that grew wild, you weren't allowed to eat it until you brought the Eimer. So the Eimer is effective. The Eimer is doing something. It's not just something that you're not allowed to eat, but the Mizbeach is. We're following Rabbi Akiva's view that holds that once there's no grain left in the field, then you need to any grain that grew, you have to take outside as well. When was that no grain left in the field? It says from one of the rains, this first rain, the second rain. Which rain was it? Revi'ah Shniya, the second rain. So therefore, there's no grain here that it's allowing. There's no grain that the Eimer is allowing. Then that means that the Eimer is just being brought as a regular carbon. And if it's allowed to be brought, even though you're not allowed to eat it, so then maybe you can bring a treifa even though you're not allowed to eat it. So we have a good teretz. Amalei Ravacha bar Abba, we have a good teretz why we need a pasuk to tell me that you're not allowed to bring the treifa. Amalei Ravacha bar Abba, bar Rava, the Ravashi. The Rabbi Kiva nami lefrech. 1 second, according to Rabbi Kiva, Mala Eimer shekein materes chadash b'chutz laaretz. What about the grain outside of Israel? Chadash, right? It's halachas of Chadash even outside of Israel. We're lenient with this in general, but there are those that are strict, and those that are strict, they're strict for good reason, because there's many opinions that hold that even outside of Israel, you're not allowed to eat the new grain until Pesach. That's why you go to the bakeries, the frum bakeries, and the cookies and other things. It says Yashan, doesn't it? Yashan. Because that's a good reason to be machmer, but it's not just like chumrah, like it's a real. It could be a deraisa. It's a very serious law, but we're lenient because we rely on the Rebbeim that relied on the Baal Shem Tov, so we're lenient.
Well, the Bach.
And they relied on the Bach, the Baal Shem Tov. They relied on the Bach. Yeah.
I think the Baal Shem Tov said something like, "Oh, the Bach is so holy, he wouldn't write something like that." We can rely on it. It was necessarily like a halachic reason. It was more like on his stature, such a holy person.
Yeah, but it is one of those things that if you're perfectly rational, you'll probably take it on as a chumrah, because when you go through the sugya, it looks like you have to be strict. But we're lenient for whatever else based on our tradition. Okay. Anyway, it says, what about chadash? What about chutz laaretz? You see, what do we mean chutz laaretz? We mean chutz laaretz doesn't have the laws of Shemitah. So you do have grain that was growing, and you have grain that's growing, and you have the Eimer that's permitting it. So the Eimer, this is a question. If the Eimer is accomplishing that it's permitting the grain, so then I really have nothing that goes on the altar that you're not allowed to eat. So why do I need a pasuk for treifa? You have no precedent that anything else that you're not allowed to eat goes on the altar. So you shouldn't need a pasuk. Well, maybe you'll say that it's not a deraisa. I want to see your Gemara for this. Even according to the one who holds that the prohibition against eating new grain outside the land of Israel is not biblical, but one could still ask, comes to permit the prohibition within itself, the prohibition of its own flour. Let me just take a look at the note. Not biblical. There's one Tana cited in the Mishnah in Kedushin. According to this view, the Eimer is not needed to permit the new grain outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, then. No. Sorry. What does it say? Yeah. Most early commentation within the crop is forbidden by Torah, both inside and outside of Israel. There's much discussion in later comments regard to the possible justification that Jews residing outside of Israel are lenient in this matter. We're lenient. We're lenient, even though it's tough to explain. but really neat. Okay. There's a few things like that, but for other reasons. What do they say? Going on a train on Shabbos is very hard to explain why it's prohibited. Because the train that does not know that you're on it, it doesn't use more energy because you stepped on it. Nevertheless, we don't allow it. And going into a hot mikvah on Shabbos, it's very hard to explain why it's allowed. Because there's when you go through the laws of Shabbos, it's complicated to go into a hot mikvah on Shabbos. But nevertheless, well, you have to see what this brings. Going on a train on Shabbos is going to bring, it's going to destroy Yiddishkeit. And going to a hot mikvah on Shabbos builds Yiddishkeit. So you have to be smart also. You can't just okay. Yeah, Dr. Stein. Let's say you're going on a train to get to the mikveh.
Melech Tzvi had them turn the temperature down on Shabbos.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right. In Los Angeles, there's a mikveh. This shul, I forget what it's called. Maybe Beis Yehuda or something. A shul that's next to Congregation Levi Yitzchak. Shul, they have a mikveh there, and also on Shabbos, it's not heated. They turn off the heater. So it's colder. It's not. I mean, it was heated yesterday, but they turned it off like right before.
Yeah.
It's lukewarm. Okay, so whatever the case is, the Omer, even if you tell me that it's not effective outside of Eretz Yisrael because it's not biblically prohibited outside of Eretz Yisrael, according to that opinion, that holds that you don't have to worry about Chadash outside of Eretz Yisrael. But nevertheless, what about in the Omer itself? There is new grain. The Omer is made of new grain, and you have to eat the remnant of the Omer. So what's the Omer doing? It's allowing itself to be eaten. So basically what we're saying is that you don't have a precedent for anything that you're not allowed to eat that's allowed to go on the Mizbeach. The Omer, you're not allowed to eat it. Yeah, but the Omer is doing something else. The Omer is allowing that. You don't have anything that's like just prohibited, plain prohibited, like a treifa that should go on the altar. One second. The Omer, you said that it's permitting itself to go on the altar, right? It's permitting itself. So let's say the same thing with the treifa. The treifa can go on the altar, and it permits itself to go on the altar. And the one that eats it will not be violating anything because for the altar we'll say it was permitted. So we can compare it to the Omer, and then we need a pasuk to tell me. Rather, we have to ask differently. It's not because the problem isn't because it's permitting something, and therefore the Omer can't be compared to the treifa. The real problem, because we can say that the treifa would be comparable to the Omer, and we'll do the same thing. You'll put it on the altar, and then you'll eat it because the Torah is permitting it. So rather, what we need to say is that the Omer has a special laws that tell me that this is the way you're supposed to do it. The Torah never told me that you're supposed to bring a treifa. It said maybe it would say that you're allowed to, but it doesn't say that you're supposed to. Mitzvah sebekach, the Omer, this is a special instruction that this is what you're supposed to do. You can't tell me, oh, you see, you're bringing something that you're not allowed. But this is a special instruction that says you're supposed to do it like this. The treifa, you don't have to bring a treifa. Go get another animal. Right? You don't have to bring a treifa. Get a better animal. So you don't have any instruction to do that. So therefore, we're left with the question of why would I think that the treifa should be permissible? That I need to have a pasuk to tell me that it's prohibited to offer it. Right.
by the week. I think just work from home that the owner that's not yet quote unquote a working owner until later on. When we were doing our show with Rico, right? No, excuse me. A regular tzlachim, the regular korban, part of it is for steps, right? And you need all four. So after the shechita, you're doing halicha. We still haven't done anything else. So we need to the mizbeach itself is a requirement, and we're assuming everything will go well and everything will be kosher. Why can't we just apply that positive thinking to Omer and say, well, the Omer's not ready yet, but we still have to move and do our way.
Are you asking about the treifa?
I'm asking, going back to the treifa, why did we even ask?
Saying why? What was our question before the treifa? We were talking about in Rava or in Rish Lakish?
We were talking about halicha. And we went into malika.
No, the malika came in as a discussion about the malika come beforehand. No, malika came in as in our discussion of the treifa.
Yeah. Look, you know what is about treifa fine, but he's going back to Omer.
So a typical aimer, the way it's brought is just like a regular carbon is brought. You do the shechita, you bring it up to the altar. You do the thing. So the aimer as well. You do the kmitza. There's preparations before you do the kmitza, and you bring it up, and you're all set. So what's the problem?
So what was the big finish that? Oh, even though the Omer wasn't really.
Oh, that was a special case. That was a discussion about the aimer that was not going to be effective because he had the wrong thoughts by the aimer. That was back. He had the wrong thoughts. Yeah. Well, it wasn't pigel. It was thoughts that it should be a different carbon, and he had those thoughts. A different mincha. And now we're saying that the aimer is not going to be effective. So how are you allowed to bring this? And okay, that was a different discussion. Well, Rish Lakish Amar. So now, in order to answer this, we're looking for a reason why I should need a pasuk to exclude a treifa from being allowed as a sacrifice. So Rish Lakish Amar Mishum Dikla Meimar Mefatem HaKteiras Yichiach. The one that mixes the keteiras should prove that he's prohibited for people, but it's mutter but it's permissible to the altar. Just 1 second. Mefatim gavrahu. Mefatim is, you're using the wrong word. Mefatim is the person that mixes. I don't know what you call him in English. The person that mixes the spices.
Bartender.
Not the bartender. The spice tender.
The mixer.
So, rather what we mean is pitam akteris. The mixture of keteiras, you're not allowed to do this for an individual, you're not allowed to make your own keteiras. However, but you're allowed to do it for the temple, which would mean that we have a precedent of something that's prohibited for an individual, for regular community people, but it's permissible to the temple. So to the treifa, it's prohibited for the people, but it's permissible to the temple. The Gemara says, you can't. What do you compare? It's not that it's just permissible to the temple. You're supposed to do it for the temple. That's the command. That's the instructions. That's how you're supposed to do it. It has nothing to do with a treifa. You were never commanded to bring a treifa as a sacrifice. You're commanded to bring a sacrifice, and you happen to pick up a treifa. You're supposed to pick up a better one. Okay. So we don't have any proof yet. Mar Breder Ravina Amar Mishum Dik Lamei Shabbos Tichiach. Shasur lehadit mut legvaya. What about Shabbos? There's so many things on Shabbos that you're not allowed to do outside the temple, and in the temple you're allowed to do them, which means that prohibited to you, permissible to the temple. Treifa as well, permissible to you, prohibited for you, permissible for the temple. I need a pasuk now to tell me that you can't bring a treifa. That would be a good teretz. Gemara says, that's not true, because Shabbos isn't actually permissible for you, because we have examples where it's not prohibited for you, because we have examples where Shabbos is permissible for you to violate Shabbos. When? B'mila. You have a bris on Shabbos, you violate the Shabbos by doing the bris. So you see, it's not like a treifa. Treifa is totally prohibited for you. The Shabbos has permissible things. What do you think? When you do a bris on Shabbos, is that because you're allowed to do the bris? It's not even you. It's mitzvah. It's not a tzarech hedyet. It's not that you're allowed to violate the Shabbos for yourself. It's because of the mitzvah. Rather, I'm going to say that why is Shabbos allowed in the temple? It's because that's the mitzvah. Because we were told that that's how you're supposed to do it. But we were never told that you're supposed to take a treifa as a carbon. Ravada Barava Omar. Back and forth over here is confusing to know where exactly you're up to. In the on the app, on the ArtScroll thing, they can color code like what's a question, what's a thing. That would be like very convenient for this Gemara, to have it in color. Like when's the question, when's the answer. You need a highlighter for us non-tech. Okay. Ravada Barava.
Oh man, I should have gotten a Shas pad.
The purple is the.
I know one is a statement.
Uh-huh.
And the yellow is wear off.
As long as you have it charged, it works.
We have another example. We have the kalayim. Kalayim is a forbidden mixture of wool and linen. It says that you're not allowed to do that for yourself, but you're allowed to do it for the kayanim. They have the belt of the kayanim was made out of kalayim. It's made out of kalayim. Yeah, we're going to mention that in a moment. That's going to mess us up. Kayin gadol. Okay. So the Gemara says, it says that's not a proof, because you also are allowed to wear kalayim by tzitzis. You're allowed to wear kalayim. So therefore, you can't prove from kalayim that there are things that are prohibited for you that are mutter on the mizbeach or mutter on in the Beis Hamikdash, because and therefore a treifa should be the same, because tzitzis it also has kalayim and you're also allowed to do it. So it's not really a comparison to treifa. Tzitzis tzarech hedyet too mitzvah. The tzitzis isn't for you; it's a mitzvah. Ella malaklayim shemitzvah bekach. The reason why you have kalayim in the Beis Hamikdash by the kohen gadol by his belt, that's because you were told to have that, but we were never told to have a treifa animal being brought as a carbon. Rav Shisha Beider Ravini Amar Mishabdik Lameima Lehad Dina V'Teisi B'Matzad. The reason why we need a pasuk is because we could have proven from the common factor that you should be allowed to bring a treifa on the mizbeach, and therefore I need a pasuk to tell me that you don't.
You could have brought a the belt, and the coin journal has a head to wear coin belt. We have a tzivah to wear tzitzis, but if those tzitzis are in kosher, then we have an usher Esau wearing those tzitzis. That's why you have to check your tzitzis before you make a bracha. I don't think the coin journal had to check his it was okay.
Yeah, whatever the case is, what we were asking is that we were looking for something that is prohibited for you and permissible in the temple. And if that's the case, then we would say treifas are prohibited for you, but they're still permissible on the altar. That's what we would say. We found an example. We found tzitzis, and we found kalayim. Kalayim is the example. Kalayim is prohibited for you, but it's permissible in the temple by the kain's belt. So we said that's not a good example because kalayim is also permissible for us by tzitzis. We were allowed to have, and therefore it's not similar to the treifa, which is never permissible for us. So since this is permissible, so you could say, so therefore we have that could explain why it's allowed sometimes in the temple, because sometimes it's permissible for you as well. But now we said that but tzitzis isn't for you. Tzitzis is for the mitzvah. So we said that could be an answer, right? That could be an answer. So therefore, we have something that's totally prohibited for you, kalayim, and it's permissible in the temple by the right. So we answer. We say once we answer. I say answer. We ask. We ask the question again. We say no, because kalayim was a command in the temple, but you were never commanded to have the treifa, so you can't compare. No, not visible. Not visible. Balmum is visible. Treifa is not necessarily visible. Or maybe it fell and they saw it fall, but it's not. It doesn't mean that it's visible on the animal. When you get to chulin, you learn all the different treifas, all different possibilities of treifa. But it could be one of them is if they watched an animal fall from a high place. And so we would consider it treifa even though there's nothing visible on it, right? But or maybe it's just something in the lungs that they find out later after they shechted it. So it's not let it be brought on the altar. Yeah.
Can I just raise a point of order? Dr. Stein's voice. I think maybe you should say your questions, like maybe write them down. Just to save your voice.
Do you follow Reb Naftali? Can you hear what's going on?
Whoa. Violence in the bedroom.
Okay.
If you were concerned about me, I would never have done it.
You know what? That's what got a price for sharing.
It's getting
Very hostile.
Hostile over here.
Price for sharing.
We're holding on the top of Daf Vav. Rav Shisha says that we have another way. We can do it with a ma'atzad, with a common factor. Malam likashen kedushasa isarta. Say 1 second. We're going to compare malika. Malika is something that's prohibited for a regular person, but it's permissible in the temple. So we said, but you can't use that as an example as something that's prohibited for you and permissible in the temple. Therefore, treifa should also be, because the malika itself is done in the temple. It's not something that's coming from outside the temple. It's something that's the procedure itself of the sacrifice is what prohibits to you. So the Gemara says, well, chayla v'dam yechichu. But we have something else that's prohibited to you, but permissible in the temple. And it's not prohibited to you because of something that happened in the temple. It's prohibited to you even before it got to the temple. The fats and the blood. They're always prohibited to you. So you can't tell me that the reason why it's prohibited, it's permissible in the temple is because in the temple itself it got the prohibition, because here I have something that was even prohibited beforehand, is nevertheless permissible in the temple. Gemara says, but you can't prove from chela v'dam, because chela v'dam, the prohibited fats in the blood, those are coming from an animal that's actually kosher. So the fact that that's allowed is very different than a treifa. The Gemara says, well, malika techiach. But the malika, the entire animal is prohibited, and nevertheless, it's permissible in the temple. So what I'm seeing is that the factor that permits it in the temple by each one is a different factor. So what I'm going to need to look for is the common denominator. The chazer adin, it's going to revolve. The logic is going to the strength of this one is not like this one. The strength of it is not like that one. However, what is the common factor? I have these things that are prohibited to a regular person, permissible in the temple. I'll be able to include also the treifa, that it's prohibited to an individual, but nevertheless, in the temple it should be permissible, and therefore I need a pasuk to tell me that it's prohibited. Very nice. We're not done the Gemara, but that's a nice shot. What's only allowed for Kayan? It's permissible to go on the altar. Okay. No. We're saying that the malika is prohibited for everyone to eat, but nevertheless the altar can get it. Say the same thing. Treifa is prohibited for everyone to eat, but the altar can get it. Then we said no, because the malika is, how does it become prohibited? How does the animal become prohibited? Only because in the temple, in the service, that's the way you do it. It was never prohibited beforehand. That's why the temple can accept it. But something that was prohibited beforehand shouldn't be accepted by the temple, by the altar. So he said, well, we find chela v'dam, which is prohibited before, and the fats and the blood was prohibited before it got to the temple, and nevertheless the temple accepts it. He says, yeah, but the chela v'dam was coming from an animal that was kosher. The rest of the animal is kosher. That's why it's acceptable. So, but the treifa, the entire animal isn't kosher. So he said, yeah, but malika, the entire animal isn't kosher, and nevertheless the temple accepts it. So don't tell me it's because the animal is kosher. They say, yeah, but malika you couldn't learn from because malika became prohibited in the temple. He said, yeah, but chela v'dam wasn't prohibited in the temple, and nevertheless it's permissible. They say, yeah, but chela v'dam comes from the animal. So you keep going in this vicious cycle, and we stop it, and we say, 1 second. All of those are prohibited. The common factor is that they're prohibited to the private person, to a regular individual, and they're permissible in the temple. So too, we'll bring a treifa, which is prohibited to a private person, should be permissible in the temple. But I see from Malika that it doesn't need to be. Chela v'dam is always prohibited, yeah, but it comes from an animal that's not always. Good. So what's the common factor? Why the temple allows it? There's a few examples here. What's the common factor? Why does the temple allow it to be brought in the temple? Because just because it's prohibited, yeah, but no, the common factor of everything. Chela v'dam and malika. Because, well, we didn't get to that. We were looking for the common factor. We're saying that common factor is that just because it's prohibited to an individual doesn't mean that it's prohibited in the temple. So to treifa, just because it's prohibited for an individual doesn't mean it's prohibited in the temple. Okay. So the Gemara says, but you can't prove it from that because ma'ala tzad hashavashim shkem mitzvasa b'kach. It's not the common factor that the common factor is that it's prohibited for an individual, permissible in the temple. No, there's a problem with all of those cases that you brought because the Torah tells me that that's what you're supposed to do. The Torah never told me that you're supposed to bring a treifa animal as a carbon. Go get another animal. Elam Ravashi. Yeah, we're still going on in the same discussion. Shemdikala Meimar mi'ikara dedina parcha. The basis of the whole question has a problem. Where were you bringing this from? Mi Balmum. We had it came from the Balmum. The Balmum, we said, was prohibited, was permissible, was a Kal V'chomer. If you're allowed to shech the Balmum, but you can't bring it as an altar, so you're allowed to eat a Balmum, it's kosher for you, but you can't bring it as an offering. So for sure, a treifa, which you're not allowed to bring, for sure you can't bring a treifa as offering. This malabal bom shekain also by makrivim kekrevim. Balmum has a special reason why it can't be brought as an offering. It has no connection to the treifa. A balmum can't be brought as an offering because besides for an offering, the balmum, the person that's bringing it also can't be a balmum. The kohen can't be a balmum. It's a special category of prohibitions. It has nothing to do with prohibited, permissible. You see that it's unique because even the kohen that's offering can't be the balmum. Makrivim is kekrevim. Just like the offering, so to the one that's bringing it. So what happens now is that you don't have a kal v'chomer. The whole kal v'chomer is off. What was our source why a treifa shouldn't be allowed? Is because if a balmum is not allowed, for sure, no, a balmum is a different story. Finished with kal v'chomer. That's our teretz. Amalei Ravacha Saba, the Ravashi, Ravacha the elder. Actually, Ravacha bar Rava, the Ravashi, just like we adjusted it before. Ravacha bar Rava, we adjusted. Yotzi daifin yechiach, v'le'asa ba makrivin kekrevin mutal lahedi yadvasa legvaya. So 1 second. I have an animal that's born with a C-section. You're not allowed to bring it as a sacrifice. Yeah, you're not allowed to bring it as a sacrifice. And you're allowed to eat it, but it can't go as a sacrifice. So if that's the case, so for sure a treifa, which you're not allowed to eat, for sure can't be brought as a sacrifice. However, a kohen that's born as a cesarean is allowed to do the work. So you see that it's not specifically a din in Yetzi Daifin. It just has to do with. It doesn't have to do with there being a cesarean, that we have a special halacha like that. It has to do with things that you're not allowed to have, that you are allowed to have, are prohibited in the temple. Mali Yetzi Daifin shkein and Kaddish beBechayra. 1 second, the Yetzi Daifin you see is hey, very nice. You see that a Yetzi Daifin is has its own halachas, because when an animal is born, a firstborn animal is born, and if it's born with a C-section, it's not considered a firstborn. That tells me that it has special halachas, and so therefore you can't compare it to a treifa. Why? Because when a treifa is born, it is considered a firstborn, if it's a firstborn, right? And it doesn't say it's not a firstborn. So if that's the case, I have no source for anything that's prohibited in the temple. I have no source that things that are prohibited for you should also be prohibited in the temple. Because the Yetzi Daifin that's prohibited in the temple has a totally different status. So I do need a pasuk to tell me that a treifa would be prohibited in the temple. The Gemara says, 1 second, but balmum yechiach, but the balmum, which is also a firstborn, and you can't bring it as a carbon. So if that's the case, so then about the balmum would tell me that the same thing applies to the treifa. It says balmum, it's totally different. Well, Yetzi Daifin yechiach, you're going to do the same thing that we did before. He said, the balmum you can't compare because the balmum has the same halacha by the kohen, besides for the right. So therefore, you can't compare it to the treifa. He said, well, what about the Yetzi Daifin, which doesn't have the halachas of the kohen, and nevertheless can't go on the altar? So we said, but the Yetzi Daifin is not kaddish beBechayra. So, but the treifa is kaddish beBechayra. So we said, but 1 second, but the we'll go back to the balmum, and we're going to have a cycle again. We have a question that this is working the other way. For sure, a treifa, which is aser, for sure should be aser in the temple. We said no. We can answer this because the tzad hashava doesn't have any exception. But the treifa is huta mechlala. What does it mean huta mechlala? What do you mean a treifa is huta mechlala? Where do you find that there's an exception by a treifa? The Gemara answers, Ilema malika da ila sa'if. Maybe the malika of the ila sa'if. Legavaya. When you do a malika, you're actually making it a treifa. And nevertheless, it's permissible. So the Gemara says, Balmum nami ba'ifas ishriyish dai. 1 second. You're telling me that you can't learn from that the treifa is different because it has an exception, right? So it's different than the two other things of the balmum and the yetzidaifin, which don't have exceptions. So 1 second. What's the exception of the treifa? That we find a permissible sacrifice. It's find a permissible to sacrifice a treifa. When you do malika, that's a treifa. That says, well, I also find an exception by a balmum. For example, oifus shtriya shtari tamas v'zachus be'im avein tamas v'zachus ba'oifus. There's no din of what gender the bird needs to be, and there's no din of if it needs to be if it can't have a mum by a bird. So we see that there's also an exception by the bird. If there's an exception by the bird, so then how could I learn that a
they can't.
The laws of male and female by the bird don't apply, whether it's male or female.
Oh yes, you can. Sir.
No, you
I don't
can't.
know that you've ever been to.
Yeah, you can tell if it's male or female, but nevertheless, it's not visible.
I'll tell you.
But nevertheless, the rules of it doesn't say by the birds if you need to bring a male or a female bird, right?
You always know that you're getting the right
The only
one.
way to tell is that they do DNA on the bird. The whole thing of feeding is not accurate.
It's illegal.
Doesn't matter. Whatever the case is the Torah doesn't restrict which type of bird you have to bring. That's not our point. That's a side point. Our main point is that the Torah doesn't tell me, the Torah doesn't restrict a balmum by a bird. The bird is allowed to be a balmum. The bird is allowed to be a balmum. That means that we find exceptions by the bird as well. If we find exceptions by the birds as well, then what are you telling me that the reason why the treifa should be allowed is because we find exceptions by the treifa? No. What are you telling me that the treifa should not be allowed? Because we find exceptions by the treifa, we also find exceptions by the bird. So the Gemara says, "Ela malika dechata sa'if l'kayanim." What about malika of dechata sa'if, which goes to the kayin eat it, and the kayanim they're eating it. It's not just on the mizbeach. It says kayanim misholchan gavaya kazachu. They're not actually eating it. It doesn't become permissible via the malika. It becomes permissible because it becomes permissible to the altar, and they get it off the altar. They're not actually taking from the altar. Let me just see where we're holding, because I'm losing track of if this is the question or this is the answer. When we said huta mechlala by the treifa, then we would need a pasuk to tell me that a treifa is unfit for a sacrifice. That would be a teretz. The question was that you don't need a pasuk for it, because I can learn it from the combination of a balmum and a yetzidaifen, that those are not allowed to go on the altar. The treifa also should not go. So we said no. The treifa is different than the common factor, because the treifa has an exception. So he said, no, it's not different than. Now we're asking, the treifa is not different because the birds also have an exception where they're permissible. What's permissible? The balmum is permissible by the birds. So
Only when we say
right.
point. Well,
So what comes out is there's no difference between a treifa and the bird. Both released from the general prohibition in this regard, since both are permitted for sacrifice upon the altar, and both are therefore permitted for consumption by the priest. So therefore, we shouldn't need a pasuk. Ella parachachi, the Gemara says. Rather, we should ask as follows: Malat hadashavashim shkein muman nikar. Timer betreifa shkein ein muman nikar. When it comes to a balmum that you're able to see, so you're able to see if something has a blemish. But by the treifa, you're not able to see. You can't tell if it has the blemish. It's not necessarily noticeable. So if that's the case, maybe we should say that it should be the balmum. The fact that the balmum is asar to the mizbeach, that doesn't tell me that the treifa should be asar to the mizbeach because it's not recognizable. So for that reason, we need a pasuk. Mishamachi yitzchikra. That's why we need a pasuk. Let's go tell the Mishnah. Yeah. The Gemara says, "Treifa mehacha nafka." This is where you, after all of this, that why do we need a pasuk? We went an entire blot almost, saying why we need a pasuk, even though we should have known it without the pasuk. Now the Gemara says, and you learn it from that pasuk. I have another pasuk that you learn it from. We learn it from another source. It says Memashki Yisrael. We derive it from pasuk in Yecheskel. It says with the waters, the well waters of Israel, which means only things minamutali Yisrael, only things that are permissible on the altar, but not things that are prohibited should be permissible on the altar. The Gemara says, or anything that passes under the rod, which was the meiser, you don't put a treifa under the rod, which is talking about the meiser behema, and which we learned from that a treifa is not fit to be an offering. The Gemara says, we need all three of these sources. If we just have that source, I could have thought that's only for something where it would never had a time when it was permissible. That's mashki Yisrael. I would compare it to something that grew, and when it grew, it was already prohibited. For example, the arla or klaya kerem, it's right when it grew, it's already prohibited. Arla is the first 3 years, and klaya kerem is a forbidden mixture in a vineyard. But if at one point it was permissible, then I could think that maybe it could go on the altar as well. Therefore, it has to tell me that even something that was permissible at one point, but now it became prohibited, is also not allowed to go on the altar. That we learned from Meiser. Anything that goes under the rod, even if it became a treifa later. Because Rahman Kol Shayavar, it would only tell me anything that's able to pass under the rod, which would be excluding the meiser, excluding the treifa. That's only if it became a treifa before you made it consecrated. Similar to the tithe, that first it was a treifa, then it becomes meiser. But let's say first you consecrated it, and then it became a treifa afterwards. I could have thought that because when you consecrated it, it was eligible, it should continue to be eligible. So, the pasuk tells me from the cattle, tells me something that's not only something that's from the cattle, but not all the cattle. It's something that's a treifa, won't be allowed to be brought as a sacrifice, even if it was consecrated when it was whole, when it was healthy. Okay, we're holding by the Mishnah. I'll be away Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Right.